Evenings in a small town of Pakistan would often descend into deep silence. Though the town was not very large, there was a strange tranquility and a sorrowful solitude lingering in its air. In the northern part of this town, in a crumbling house with a dusty courtyard, there were some overgrown plants, a few broken bricks, and an old wooden door. The inhabitants of this house were not very well known, but people would sometimes speak of them with respect and sometimes with wonder. Living in this house was a sweet little girl named Ma'ira, around 12 years old, along with her grandfather, Abdul Rahman, a man about 65 to 70 years of age, of medium height with a white beard, known for his quiet nature and soft heart. Some people of the area called him Baba Ji, while children from nearby homes would look at him strangely because he didn't mingle much. He would simply spend his days peacefully with his granddaughter from morning till evening. Ma'ira's parents had died in an accident when she was only 5 years old. Thus, her grandfather had become her entire world. Abdul Rahman had embraced her to his chest and made sure she never felt the absence of her parents. The house was small, but it provided clean air and water, and that was enough for them. Sometimes Abdul Rahman would work as a carpenter. At other times, he would help out in someone's shop with minor tasks. From his modest earnings, he managed 2 meals a day, and he had no need for any grander dreams. Some women of the neighborhood would taunt that Abdul Rahman should arrange a marriage for his granddaughter, but he cared little for such remarks. His only goal was to raise his granddaughter properly. They were dependent on each other. The grandfather would take care of the little girl, drop her to school and pick her up, tell her bedtime stories at night. On the other hand, Ma'ira would heat water for him every morning, help prepare tea, and sweep the courtyard. It was a small paradise, but priceless for them. In such homes, often there is peace and silence. But fate had other plans. For several months, some women of the neighborhood noticed that Ma'ira seemed deeply worried. She used to be very lively before, but now she had become subdued. Some girls at school also observed that she would complain of nausea while eating. One day, a friend asked her, and Ma'ira said, "I feel like vomiting in the mornings, and I have headaches too." Since Ma'ira was so young, no one paid much attention, thinking it was just a child's complaint. But the situation changed when, a few weeks later, the girls noticed a swelling visible through her clothes. While sitting down, she would hold her stomach, either out of pain or for protection. 2 or 3 girls who witnessed this scene went home and shared it with their families, and the news reached the women of the neighborhood. Then the whispers began. Ma'ira's stomach seems to be growing. Could she be pregnant? This sentence was so serious that dangerous thoughts immediately arose in people's minds. If she really was pregnant, who was responsible? After all, she lived only with her grandfather. Some minds very quickly jumped to a negative conclusion. They assumed it must be the grandfather committing this heinous act. Strange whispers began to surface. Some said it might be a slander. Others insisted it must be true. The rumor spread so rapidly that Abdul Rahman himself remained completely unaware of the stories being woven about him. One night, a group of people from the neighborhood gathered and headed towards Abdul Rahman's house in the middle of the night. They carried sticks and clubs in their hands. They started banging loudly on the door. The noise in the dead of night startled Abdul Rahman awake. Ma'ira too woke up in fear. Both of them, frightened, asked what had happened. From outside, voices shouted, "Open the door or we'll break it down." Abdul Rahman gathered his senses and opened the door. In front of him stood 10 to 15 furious people. Some were women from the neighborhood, and some were men. For a moment, he couldn't comprehend what had happened. Then one woman slapped him hard and screamed, "You scoundrel! You had no shame in making your own granddaughter's belly swell?" Hearing this sentence, Abdul Rahman froze in shock. What a horrific accusation. He did not resist much. He only pleaded desperately, insisting he had done nothing, but the crowd was too emotional. Someone grabbed him by the collar, someone else pushed him to the ground, and others began kicking him. Ma'ira, crying, rushed out from inside to save her grandfather, but someone shoved her away too. The next moment, vandalism broke out inside the house. More people from the surrounding area gathered. There was chaos erupting inside the house. After a while, a bearded man stepped forward and tried to stop the crowd. "What are you all doing? Bring evidence first. Don't just beat him up like this." But the mob was fueled by the fire of revenge. To them, Ma'ira's swollen belly was evidence enough. A woman, covering her face with the corner of her scarf, declared that she had seen the girl vomiting several times, that her belly was swelling from the front, and that there was no man in the house except the grandfather. It was as if everyone had already reached the conclusion that only the grandfather could have committed such a shameful act. Although Abdul Rahman kept crying and denying, swearing, "By God, I never even thought of such a thing. How could I ever do something like that to my own granddaughter?" No one was willing to listen. His entire honor shattered. His years of good relations were crushed beneath the weight of suspicion. The people pushed him out of the house. But even that wasn't the end of it. Someone had already informed the police, alleging that an old man had impregnated his young granddaughter and demanding his immediate arrest at the scene. Yet Abdul Rahman was not given even a moment to defend himself. He managed to escape the crowd and fled into the darkness of the night. He didn't even have the strength to take his granddaughter with him. The people were threatening, "Hand her over to us so we can take her to the hospital and get her examined." Thus, poor Ma'ira was left trapped in this terrifying environment, her tears unstoppable. Even she herself didn't understand what was happening to her body. Her head hurt, her belly was swelling. But now she had to face this calamity where everyone assumed she was pregnant. A few people suggested taking the girl to a hospital to find out the truth. The next day, they brought her to a government hospital. There, a lady doctor conducted an initial examination and was stunned. The girl was very young. Even if she really was pregnant, it would be tragic. However, the doctor grew suspicious that perhaps this wasn't just a case of pregnancy. She recommended a full set of tests, blood work, ultrasound, and some detailed examinations. It was one of those months when the hospital was overcrowded and there were too few doctors, so the entire examination process took several days. Meanwhile, news spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Yes, the girl is definitely expecting. Abdul Rahman was cursed by many. Some said they would beat him with shoes, others vowed not to let him live. No one even paused to consider that there might be another reason. Poor Ma'ira would lie at night on a hospital bed, sobbing, her heart whispering, "Where is grandfather? He never did anything wrong to me." She worried herself, wondering, what is happening inside my body? Why is my health deteriorating? 2 days later, the medical reports came back. When the doctor opened the report, she was left speechless. It clearly stated that Ma'ira's hormonal levels were not indicative of pregnancy. Rather, she had a tumor or growth inside her abdomen that was steadily enlarging. A benign tumor, or some kind of glandular issue, was creating a shape that resembled a pregnancy. But it was definitely not a pregnancy. The doctor immediately ordered a few more confirmatory tests, and it was conclusively determined that Ma'ira was suffering from an internal medical condition, which explained her nausea and the swelling of her abdomen. It was fortunate that the tumor had not yet turned cancerous, but now emergency surgery was necessary. The doctor then said to one of the women who was taking care of Ma'ira, "This child is definitely not pregnant. You people falsely leveled a filthy accusation. Her belly has swollen only due to an illness. We must perform surgery urgently, or it will become dangerous." When this truth came to light, the people of the neighborhood were struck with shock. They were stunned, realizing, what have we done? We accused Abdul Rahman of the vilest crime, drove him out of his home, destroyed his life, and the entire story turned out to be wrong. Some people held their heads in despair, while others wept in shame, realizing they had labeled a pure and righteous man as a criminal, ruining his decades of good reputation. Now, what could they do? One thing was clear. They had to find him, beg for his forgiveness, and arrange for Ma'ira's surgery. On the other hand, the hospital authorities informed them that a significant amount of money was needed for the surgery. This tumor surgery was not easy. It was a long and complicated procedure. There was no family member available to take responsibility for Ma'ira, except her grandfather, who had disappeared. A few neighbors sat together and decided that they would collect donations to make the treatment possible. Some focused on arranging the money, while others worried about seeking forgiveness. But the pressing question was, where is Abdul Rahman? People searched for him everywhere, asking at bus terminals, parks, and shrines, but he was nowhere to be found. Speculation spread that he might have left the city altogether. Everyone was burdened with guilt, realizing how terribly they had wronged an innocent man. Ma'ira's surgery had become inevitable. Money was collected, and some generous people from the neighborhood gave open-handedly, seeking atonement for their sin. Even some government assistance was obtained, and thus the date for the surgery was fixed. But Ma'era continuously missed her grandfather. She cried, saying, "Where has he gone? I just want to tell him that I was never pregnant." The nurses in the ward tried to console her, but she remained sorrowful. One evening, a few young men searching outside the hospital wandered into a park. There, on a rough old bench, sat an elderly man, eyes filled with desolation. They looked carefully, but it was Abdul Rahman. One of the young men called out, "Babaji!" Abdul Rahman startled and lifted his head. His face was worn, his hair disheveled, his clothes dusty, and a bandage wrapped around his hand was perhaps from some scuffle or a fall. Seeing the boys, he grew fearful, thinking they might have come to harm him again. But they spoke softly. "We've come to take you home, Babaji. We made a mistake. Ma'era has a tumor. She was never pregnant. You are innocent. She is in the hospital now and surgery will happen soon. Please come back with us. Everyone wants to apologize." Hearing this, Abdul Rahman's tears flowed. In a trembling voice, he said, "What wrong had I done? I did nothing. How is Ma'era? Take me to her, please." The young men sighed and gently took his hand, starting the journey back. When they reached the hospital, the surgery had just begun. The doctor informed them that it would be a long operation, as the tumor was large and located in a sensitive area. Many people had gathered outside the ward, their faces heavy with guilt. No one had the courage to meet Abdul Rahman's eyes. He sat in a corner, counting his prayer beads, praying endlessly, "Oh Allah, please save my granddaughter. I cannot live without her." Several hours passed before the doctor finally emerged with a smile, announcing that the surgery had gone well. The danger had passed, though recovery would take time. Upon hearing this, everyone uttered words of gratitude. Abdul Rahman immediately fell into prostration, weeping uncontrollably. A little while later, a nurse informed them that Ma'era was regaining consciousness and that visitors could see her one by one. But everyone agreed Abdul Rahman should go first. He entered the room, and there, in the dim light, Ma'era's eyes fluttered open, filled with tears, as if awakened by the faint sound of his presence. In her frail state, when Ma'era sensed her grandfather's presence, she softly called out, "Dada!" Abdul Rahman kissed her forehead and, bursting into tears, said, "My child, I am so sorry that I couldn't save you that day. People took you away, and I could do nothing. But everything is fine now, right? You are my life. Praise be to Allah, you survived." With tears in her eyes, Ma'era replied, "Grandfather, when you left, I was so scared. I didn't understand what was happening. I kept calling out for you." Abdul Rahman comforted her. "I am here now. I'm not going anywhere." Ma'era stayed in the hospital for a few more days, and gradually her condition began to strengthen. The doctors indicated that all danger had passed. The tumor had been removed, and now only routine checkups would be needed. During this time, people from the neighborhood visited several times, each trying individually to apologize to Abdul Rahman. They all assured him that they now realized he was innocent and that they had made a terrible mistake. Abdul Rahman, crying, said, "You all leveled an unseen crime upon me without investigation. I had no place left to seek shelter. But if you ask me, I forgive you. I only wish for my granddaughter's health." There was shame and remorse in everyone's eyes. They even formally drafted a document stating that Abdul Rahman had been falsely accused, that all expenses had been covered by the community, and that they had no grievances. Thus, a major uproar came to its end. People would say to one another, "See how misunderstandings can destroy lives." Finally, the day came when Ma'era was discharged from the hospital. As they returned home, a remarkable scene awaited them. 20 to 25 people were gathered in front of their house, holding garlands and flowers as if welcoming her victory. Supported by her grandfather's arm, Ma'era stepped forward. "I'm still weak." Everyone clapped for her, and children ran around offering sweets. It felt like a celebration, as if they had saved a child's life, though in between, a grave mistake had been committed. Abdul Rahman, with tears in his eyes, said, "I am no hero. I am simply a grandfather. I only wish for my granddaughter's good health." The neighbors folded their hands and said, "We are all guilty before you, yet you must embrace us." Abdul Rahman forgave all grievances without hesitation. His only goal was to walk forward, hand in hand with his granddaughter, toward a new morning. Days passed, and happiness slowly reclaimed their home. The trees in the courtyard were trimmed, some flowers were planted. Women from the neighborhood would come by to help, bringing meat and vegetables. Life began to find its rhythm again. Maira was now preparing to return to school, but according to the doctor's advice, complete rest was still essential. Thus, she continued her studies at home. An educated aunt volunteered to come teach her so she wouldn't fall behind. All of this support from the community was their form of atonement, a way to soothe their souls after having hurled a baseless accusation at an innocent family. One evening, Abdul Rahman Saad, now lovingly called Chacha Rahman by the people, sat in the veranda resting his head in his hands, lost in thought. Maira came over to him. She was much better now, able to walk, though still slowly. She said, "Grandfather, I want to talk to you." Abdul Rahman gently pulled her onto his lap, stroking her fine hair, and asked, "Yes, my dear, what is on your mind?" Maira said, "There's something I don't understand. How did people become so cruel that they leveled such a horrific accusation against a soft-hearted person like you? They saw my body was swollen and started suspecting. But how did they believe it so firmly without any proof?" "You never harmed anyone," Maira said softly. Abdul Rahman took a deep breath and said, "My child, when emotions overpower people in society, reason vanishes. A false rumor spreads rapidly, and no one bothers to investigate. This is what is called fitna, tribulation. But never forget. In the end, the truth was revealed, and everyone apologized. Now we must leave the past behind and look toward the future." Maira nodded slightly, a faint smile appearing on her lips. She said, "Grandfather, when I grow up, I want to become a doctor, so that if any other girl falls ill, people won't accuse her family but will ensure proper medical checks are done. I want to tell everyone that we should not rush to conclusions without knowing the truth." Hearing this, Abdul Rahman pulled her closer. There were tears in his eyes, realizing how wise his little granddaughter had become. Yes, it had been an experience. A young girl had seen how, instead of trying to understand her innocent condition, people had called her pregnant and turned her grandfather into a villain. But under this very sky, there is a divine mercy that eventually reveals the truth. After some time, Maira made a full recovery. When she returned to school, her classmates welcomed her warmly. Some asked about her condition. "What happened to your belly?" She smiled and explained that it wasn't a pregnancy. It was a tumor that had been successfully removed. Everyone was surprised, but they were also happy that the thorns in her path had been cleared. In the town, a serious lesson remained. Parents and guardians must not be hastily accused of heinous acts. If a child's health shows unusual changes, it should be understood through scientific methods, not by letting emotional reactions disgrace someone's honor. It truly became a lesson that while families and communities should care deeply for children, they must also be cautious, lest false accusations destroy innocent lives. Now that the storm had passed, everyone breathed a sigh of relief. One day, a sermon was delivered at the neighborhood's main mosque. The imam said, "Accusing someone without evidence is a grave sin, especially accusing the guardian of an orphan or a helpless child." Everyone sat quietly listening. In their hearts, they surely reflected, "This is exactly the incident we ourselves created and suffered through." At the end of the sermon, the imam said, "God has taught us never to accuse without proper investigation. If someone is in trouble, help them. Do not abandon them." A pang of guilt stirred in everyone's hearts. Why didn't we think like this earlier? They had turned a simple medical condition into a scandal. Meanwhile, at home, Maira started writing in a diary where she recorded the entire incident. She wrote, "It's true, I too was scared, not knowing what was happening to me. But no one noticed that my skin was turning pale, that I was growing weaker. Everyone only thought I was pregnant. My grandfather suffered terribly. These memories will stay in my heart, but I want to transform them into something positive. If I become a doctor, I will never judge a patient's case hastily. I will investigate thoroughly and properly before making any decision. Later, many people read the lines from her diary, and they were moved to tears, realizing that this little girl had drawn a profound lesson from their mistakes. By the will of God, sometime later, a medical camp was organized in the area. Maira was invited as a special guest, the girl who had survived a rare type of tumor. Doctors praised her courage, and a small article featuring her photo appeared in the local newspaper. It said that this was the girl whom society had once wrongly judged, but who had now recovered and was continuing her education. Seeing all of this, people understood how mere suspicions could destroy lives. But that, in the end, the truth inevitably comes to light. One summer afternoon, while people were taking their midday naps after lunch, Abdul Rahman sat in the veranda wearing a traditional turban, chatting lightly with his granddaughter. Nearby, a small ceiling fan spun rapidly, making a feeble attempt to ease the heat. Maira had picked up a book filled with information about physical health. She was telling her grandfather, "Look, it says here that if a person's abdomen swells unusually, it could be a tumor or a fluid cyst. It shouldn't immediately be assumed to be pregnancy. Blood tests can clearly distinguish the difference." Placing his hand gently on her head, Abdul Rahman said, "Yes, my child, but not everyone possesses such understanding." Maira shook her head in sorrow. At that moment, a few children knocked on their door and called out, "Maira Baji, come outside, let's play." Maira closed her book, glanced at her grandfather, and asked for permission. "May I go outside for a little while and play with the kids?" Smiling, her grandfather replied, "Go, my child, stay happy. Just don't run around too much. You are still recovering." Maira nodded obediently and walked out. Outside in the alley, the children greeted her with immense affection, fully aware of the great hardship she had survived. One little girl laughingly said, "Make yourself the doctor in our game so you can check us when we fall." All the children burst into laughter, a pure affection hidden within the joke. Maira too joined them with a soft giggle. It was a moment of happiness, showing that even after immense hardship, life was regaining its color once again. One day, on the occasion of World Parents' Day, a few people from the neighborhood organized a gathering. There, Maira briefly shared her story and told the parents present that they should carefully monitor their children. If any physical change or discomfort appears, they should not jump to conclusions, but rather seek proper medical evaluation. If they themselves are not parents, they should advise the guardians to do the same. Some people were moved to tears, realizing how serious the matter was, how they had once labeled a child's illness as pregnancy and inflicted suffering upon an old man. It was a grave mistake. Everyone resolved to be cautious in the future. The lesson was clear. If a child's health shows abnormal signs, approach the matter responsibly, seek medical diagnosis, and avoid being swept away by social emotions and accusations. In a few months, another new change came. As Maira's health further improved, she decided she wanted to learn the Quran from the local Qari Sahib at the mosque. She said, "I have recovered from a physical illness, but I also need nourishment for my soul." Her grandfather joyfully gave his permission. The neighbors praised her resolve, saying that she wanted to learn Quran for the forgiveness of her parents. What a noble intention. Thus, people were further touched by her spiritual commitment. During a conversation, she also shared her story with a nurse. The nurse said, "If only we had conducted a thorough examination in the beginning, so much misunderstanding could have been avoided." Maira, in her usual positive tone, replied, "It's all right. It was all a lesson. Now we must move forward." Meanwhile, a few months later, a municipal officer visited the town. He asked the local people if any particular incident had taken place. Someone narrated Maira's story. The officer asked whether any legal action had been taken regarding the false accusation. The people grew silent. They admitted that they had settled the matter among themselves. They had brought Abdul Rahman back home, helped in Maira's surgery, and reconciled everything. The officer nodded with satisfaction and said, "Good that you resolved it yourselves. But in the future, be careful, you placed a criminal charge on an innocent man." The people felt even more ashamed. Months later, a new signboard was put up outside their home. It read in Urdu, "Maira Clinic, a dream for the future." The signboard was actually a humorous creation, written by the grandfather himself, proclaiming that one day his granddaughter would become a doctor. People passing by would smile and think, how wonderful, a little girl has so brightly displayed her dream. Ma'era too would smile and say, I'm not a doctor yet, but I'm preparing myself mentally. One day, I'll practice for real. Finally, when everyone saw that Ma'era had fully recovered, a large gathering was organized in the neighborhood. It was named a Thanksgiving ceremony, an event to acknowledge that although they had made a grave mistake, Allah had forgiven them, and they wished for the girl to start a new chapter of her life. At the event, Abdul Rahman and Ma'era were invited onto the stage. People showered them with flowers. In a brief speech, Ma'era said, even though I was just a child, I faced such a great ordeal. I kept praying to my Lord. When my grandfather was separated from me, I felt utterly alone. But I found the strength to believe that the truth can never stay hidden. Whatever happened, I forgive everyone. I only hope that no other girl ever has to endure such pain. Hearing her words, many people broke down, crying and admitting their mistakes. After the ceremony, the grandfather and granddaughter returned home. That night, they sat in the courtyard under the moonlight. Ma'era asked, Grandfather, are you upset that I forgave everyone? After all, they wronged you too. Her grandfather replied gently, My dear, what good would come from being angry? I am happy that people have corrected themselves. I would never wish to do to them what they did to us. This home shines because of your smile, not because of revenge. Ma'era thought in her heart about how people could commit such cruelty and yet still have the softness to seek forgiveness. She smiled and said, Grandfather, you are so good. I will never leave you. Abdul Rahman smiled warmly and embraced her. Sometime later, a writing competition was held at school. The topic was misunderstandings in our society and how to solve them. Ma'era wrote her story in words. How simply because of a swollen abdomen, people had assumed a girl was pregnant, accused her guardian of terrible crimes, but later it turned out to be purely a medical issue, with no hint of wrongdoing. Her essay astonished everyone. It was sent to the district-level competition where Ma'era won first prize. The school principal congratulated her, saying, You have expressed a very profound truth, how people rush to emotional judgments far too quickly. A few more days passed, and it was heard that Ma'era had decided to enroll in a nursing course alongside her schooling. She had developed a particular interest in biology, especially concerning younger children. Her grandfather said, That's good, but first complete your basic education. However, Ma'era was insistent. I want to enter the medical field, no matter what. Everyone admired her passion. Truly, this girl was turning her trial into strength. Thus, the story comes to an end, but leaves behind a lasting lesson, that when it comes to children and their health, parents and guardians must be cautious and responsible. If a child falls ill, seek professional medical examination. Not heed the rumors of society that can destroy a home. It also taught the neighbors that before hurling accusations, thorough investigation is mandatory. How unjust it was to throw a shameful accusation on an innocent old man and drive him out of his home. Eventually, everyone had to bow their heads in shame when it became clear the child's issue was not pregnancy but a tumor. On the other hand, Abdul Rahman also proved that with the power of love and patience, a person can rise again, no matter how many times he stumbles. It was Ma'era's innocent spirit and her grandfather's heartfelt prayers that ultimately emerged victorious. The neighborhood, too, collectively atoned for its mistake. They covered the cost of the girl's surgery and finally embraced her with love. This entire story, though captured in about 10,000 words, leaves the deep feeling that we witnessed a tale where a grave misunderstanding concerning a child nearly destroyed a family. But in the end, the truth prevailed. It carries a universal message. Never rush to judgment based on emotions and suspicions. Especially for parents, the lesson is clear. Take your children's health seriously. Observe carefully if there are any unusual changes in their bodies or behavior. If any signs appear, seek a medical diagnosis as the first priority. It is far better to consult a doctor than to stain someone's reputation with baseless accusations. Even if a crime is suspected, investigation remains necessary, but when mere assumptions lead to a false accusation against an innocent person, not only is their home shattered, but the accusers themselves are left with crushing guilt. This, in essence, is the core of Ma'era's story. In the end, Maira's recovery and her grandfather's patience gave this story a joyful conclusion. People now say the neighborhood is more active and united than ever before. Everyone is more willing to help each other. Because one powerful experience showed them the devastating results of emotional decisions. If ever a child now appears ill, people immediately take them to the doctor instead of allowing dark assumptions to ignite the entire neighborhood. In this light, the message for parents and guardians becomes even more critical. Failure to properly observe and understand a child's health issues can give rise to serious misunderstandings. A swollen belly might lead to wrongful assumptions of pregnancy, when in fact it could simply signal an internal illness. When families or communities swept up by emotions unleash injustice, even seeking forgiveness may not be enough to undo the damage. Thus, the final cry of this story is, for God's sake, let parents and society work together to care for children. Avoid placing baseless accusations. First investigate, observe, and consult doctors. Only then reach any conclusions. The truth does not remain hidden forever, and if someone has been wronged, a day will come when reality is revealed, bringing severe regret to those who acted unjustly. But if, like Maira and her grandfather, one maintains courage and a spirit of forgiveness even amid injustice, then healing is possible, and life can be restored. As one poet so beautifully put it, even on a bed of flowers, thorns can appear. If you sow the seeds of hatred, you will harvest cruelty. Maira stands today as a living example that innocence and truth can tear down even the greatest fabrications. And Abdul Rahman bears witness that when a heart is filled with love, even the harshest storms cannot turn it bitter. This is the true lesson of life, to hold compassion for everyone, to investigate thoroughly before passing judgment, and to sow the seeds of peace within our homes and societies. May God grant us all the wisdom to understand. This story doesn't truly end here. Its impact may continue to open the eyes of many children, parents, and guardians. Maira's dream, that one day she would become a doctor, may one day write a new chapter of history where, if a young girl's belly swells instead of accusations, she will receive immediate medical care. Thus, she will be able to save others from the same agony she once endured herself. This spirit is akin to lighting lamps with one's own blood, transforming personal suffering into light for others. May every parent and guardian adopt compassion, careful investigation, and wisdom, so that no innocent child ever again becomes a victim of false accusations or unjust cruelty.